Since its creation in the 1950s, the FBI has seen over 500 criminals placed on its 10 most wanted fugitive list. In recent years, the FBI has created new lists and sections to house even more of the most wanted. With an ever-changing world, the need for a cyber's most wanted has given space to some of the most heinous criminals in the world. Number 5. 5-year-old Ariana DeJesus was described as a bright and friendly girl living with her family in Huntington Park, Philadelphia. Little Ariana had just started as a student at East Frankfort Daycare, and her teacher, C.J. Waddy, described her as a responsive and intelligent student. Ariana loved playing with her siblings and other students at the daycare, and she clearly had a bright future ahead of her. Her family enjoyed watching her flourish and discussed what her future career would be, but unfortunately, little Ariana's life was snatched away from her in one of the most horrifying ways. July 29, 2000, was warm and breezy in Huntington Park, Philadelphia. That morning, Ariana and her sister played with the neighborhood children as their mother, Lisa DeJesus, tidied the home and prepared dinner. The children ran up and down North Fairhill and Luzerne streets freely, without a care in the world. But unbeknownst to them, they were being watched. After completing her chores at home, Lisa stepped out of the apartment to go to a nearby shop. Lisa assumed Ariana would be safe in the company of her sister and the other children, but she was wrong. Minutes later, as Lisa approached the apartment steps, she froze in horror. Ariana was missing. She questioned her other daughter, who told her Ariana had left. Fear and panic washed over Lisa as she ran down the street, screaming her daughter's name. She knocked on every door and buzzed every bell, hoping to find her little girl, but nobody had seen her. Hours after she was last seen, Ariana DeJesus was reported missing to the police. Lisa and her family worked tirelessly to keep Ariana's name in the media. They posted flyers, made media appearances, and walked around the neighborhood looking for any sign of her. For Ariana's classmates at the Frankfort Daycare, it was hard to comprehend why her desk sat empty. Neighbors and other residents of Philadelphia turned up in droves to help Lisa find Ariana, but it proved to be much more complex than anticipated. The police investigation was intense, with officers being dispatched to the DeJesus home and other properties in the area. For 5 long days, officers, Lisa, and concerned residents scoured Huntington Park, but there were no clues. On August 3rd of 2000, Ariana's disappearance came to a shocking conclusion. While searching a vacant apartment located at 8th and Pike, officers came across the body of little Ariana. Ariana had been asphyxiated and assaulted. Her assailant had callously wrapped part of her remains in a trash bag in an attempt to conceal her. Lisa and the residents of Huntington Park were devastated by the discovery. The autopsy revealed Ariana was found wearing the clothes that she had last been seen in, confirming that she'd been harmed most likely the same day she disappeared. Investigators in Philadelphia contacted the FBI and asked for their assistance in this case. Local police and FBI agents were dispatched to every home in the area. Residents, business owners, and dozens of others were interviewed at length. Lisa told investigators she last saw her daughter jumping from the 3rd step of the outside stairs at their apartment complex. She walked to the store and returned 5 to 10 minutes later to find that her daughter had disappeared. During the crime scene investigation, forensic officers discovered a distinctive t-shirt with a political logo on it close to Ariana's body. The t-shirt belonged to an adult male, and investigators hoped that this would be the vital piece of evidence they needed to close the case. Jorge Contreras was just one of many people interviewed by the FBI, and when he was shown the t-shirt found near Ariana's body, his blood froze. He recognized the shirt, telling officers that he had given it to a man named Carlos. According to Jorge, Carlos was homeless and would often pick up odd jobs, fixing things around people's homes. Carlos told Jorge he was an immigrant, possibly from Honduras. Disturbingly, Carlos had not been seen or heard from since Ariana was reported missing. A manhunt for Carlos began, but without any helpful information, the chase led nowhere. Investigators later stated that they believed Carlos was living at the 8th and Pike apartments where Ariana's body was found. Without evidence or a solid suspect, Ariana's case quickly went cold. Her family continued to keep her name in the media in the hopes somebody would come forward. It would take almost 7 years before the FBI and local law enforcement got the break in the case that they so desperately needed. In March of 2007, the FBI received a huge tip. Arizona law enforcement had recently processed the DNA of Alexis Flores, a Honduran immigrant. They discovered the disturbing truth after submitting the DNA to CODIS. The DNA was taken in Arizona in 2007 and matched the DNA found at the Philadelphia crime scene. The FBI was immediately notified and the case took on new life. Shortly after receiving the groundbreaking news, local and federal arrest warrants were issued for Alexis Flores, who would have been 25 years old at the time of the crime. On June 2, 2007, Alexis Flores was added to the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives list, becoming the 487th fugitive to be added. While the FBI finally had answers, they were faced with a new challenge. Alexis Flores had an extensive criminal history, dating back to the early 2000s. In 2002, he was arrested in Arizona for shoplifting. In 2004, the police were at his door again, and during this visit, Alexis would get himself into more trouble. What started as a simple noise complaint ended with Alexis being charged with forgery. Alexis provided the Arizona police with forged and faked documents, something that they didn't take kindly to. Alexis Flores was sent to jail for forgery and served just 60 days of his sentence. He was in the US illegally and was deported to Honduras in June of 2005. The felony charge and deportation did not deter Alexis, and within a year, he found himself back in Arizona. According to the FBI, a DNA sample was obtained from Alexis in 2006. However, it was not submitted to CODIS. In 2007, when the sample was submitted to CODIS, officers learned the chilling truth. Had the DNA been submitted earlier before his deportation, Alexis Flores may not have wound up on the FBI's most wanted list. The attacker's identification was a significant victory for the FBI and Ariana's family, but they were faced with a new challenge: finding Alexis. According to the FBI, Alexis may be in his home country of Honduras, which makes arresting him all the more difficult. The FBI is offering a $250,000 reward for any information that leads to the arrest of Alexis Flores. Number 4. In the early morning hours of January 12, 1991, residents of Boston's Chinatown were awoken by the sound of screams and shots. Residents and business owners scrambled to see what was happening in their small community. Many worried they were under attack and could be in the next firing line. As the smoke cleared and emergency staff arrived, the full gravity of the situation was revealed. When all was said and done, 5 people had lost their lives, with the 6th lucky to have made it out alive. In the days that followed, the FBI would dub this attack the Boston Chinatown Massacre. The evening of January 11, 1991, was shaping up to be relatively unremarkable for the patrons at the social club. As it was known, the club was an illegal gambling den that operated in the basement of 85 Tyler Street in Boston's Chinatown district. Chinese men, usually from gangs, would gather to bet, play cards, poker, and other games, with the stakes being high. The social club was known to be open at all hours of the day, and only those with the secret password would be given entry. January 11th was no exception, and gangsters flowed into the club as the night went on. At around 2 a.m., Pak Wing Lee knocked on the door of 85 Tyler Street, giving the doorman the secret password. He was given entry to the basement and called out to his associates who were playing cards. After getting comfortable, Pak Lee grabbed a hand of cards and dug into the game. A few hours after Pak Lee arrived, things began to take a turn for the worse. Just as the men had become engrossed in their card game, they heard shouting coming from the stairway. In a flash, 3 men brandishing firearms entered the basement. The instructions were clear: put your hands up and don't move. Despite following the instructions, intruders were not in the mood for games that evening. According to Pak Lee, the 3 armed men began shooting people one by one. Over the course of 10 minutes, Pak Lee watched as his friends and associates came under fire. He noted the gunmen had thick Vietnamese accents and spoke both Vietnamese, Chinese, and English. Pak Lee willingly followed the man's instructions, telling them where to find the money and valuables, but they were not there for them. Minutes after the massacre started, Pak Lee came under fire. Incredibly, he survived despite being hit in the back of the head. The three men took a moment to look at the chaos they had caused before fleeing the basement of 85 Tyler Street. They believed they had eradicated all witnesses, but they were wrong. According to Pak Lee, who later testified to the FBI, he awoke hours later feeling dazed and confused. The attack had only rendered him unconscious. He was able to heave himself up the stairs and get help at the side of the road. Pak Lee was admitted to the hospital, having narrowly escaped a meeting with his maker. Shortly after Pak Lee called for an ambulance, the Boston Police Department arrived. When they descended into the basement, they were met with one of the most brutal scenes Boston had ever seen. In the basement, the Boston police discovered the bodies of 5 people. The scene was so brutal, many officers needed regular breaks. The Boston Police Department found this scene challenging to tackle. Pak Lee, the only surviving victim, was hospitalized and unavailable for an interview. Nobody else in the area would divulge information through fear of being targeted by the gang next. Thankfully, Pak Lee made a full recovery and was then able to speak to the Boston Police Department. In his interview, Pak Lee identified 3 men. These men were from Vietnam and apparently made a name for themselves in the Asian crime world. The men had been operating in the US for a number of years to strengthen their syndicate's influence. By the time the Boston Police Department and FBI had heard their names, the 3 men were already 5 steps ahead of them. Hours after committing the attack, the men fled to Atlantic City, New Jersey, where they spent the next several days gambling. Once they felt the heat rising, they drove to New York and flew to Hong Kong. The 3 men were added to the FBI's most wanted list, where only 2 of them would remain for 7 years. Hung Tian Pham was the subject of a federal arrest warrant courtesy of the state judge of the District of Massachusetts. In 2001, the unthinkable happened. Nam Them and Sini Tran were captured in China. When US authorities learned of this, they immediately pushed for their extradition. The entire process was years in the making, and several years later, the 2 went to trial. The FBI now had 1 man left to find, Hung Tian Pham, a member of the Ping An gang. The gang had held strong points across Boston during the 1980s and early 90s, and it was clear business was not about to slow down. Pham was described as extraordinarily clever and cunning. He was able to evade law enforcement for over 32 years, and likely believes he could last 32 more. Pham is Vietnamese of Chinese descent, giving him a solid grasp of Vietnamese and Chinese. Multiple searches have been conducted for Pham, but he's a master of disguise. If he's hiding out in China, it'll be far more difficult to extradite him to the US, as there's currently no extradition treaty in place. The Boston Police Department and FBI are desperate to catch Hung Tian Pham and make him face justice. There are rumors that Pham was last seen in Bangkok, Thailand, although he may be living anywhere in the world. Years after the warrant was issued, the FBI would reveal that the Boston police also wanted Pham in connection with other serious crimes that took place on January 8, 1991. There's currently a $30,000 reward for information that leads to his arrest. Anyone with information is asked to contact the FBI's Boston office at 857-386-2000 or 1-800-225-5324. Number 3. The name Glenn Stewart Godwin strikes fear into every guard and officer at Folsom State Prison in Folsom, California. To others, his name is just that, a name. Glenn's case has somehow flown under the radar, but this doesn't make his crime any less chilling. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, Glenn committed a string of heinous acts in small California towns. Street by street, residents closed their windows, bolted their doors, and employed the help of guard dogs to keep themselves safe from the maniac wandering the street. On August 3, 1980, the few people living in Eagle Mountain, a deserted town in California, made a horrific discovery. At first, the residents were intrigued by the car, which had been blown out. The desert is often used as a dumping ground, so residents were not too concerned. But as they grew closer, they smelled something, the unmistakable stench of decomposition. The residents scrambled for help, with local law enforcement arriving soon after. As police drew nearer to the car, they were hit with the undeniable stench too. When they looked inside the car, they found human remains, that of an adult male. Investigators immediately set about identifying him and hoped his family would claim him. Following several appeals, the heartbroken family of Kim Robert LaValle came forward to claim his remains. According to his family, Kim was a bright and happy person who always made time for his family. Police reports indicate that Glenn Godwin and his roommate, Frank Soto Jr., lured Kim to their shared apartment where they launched their attack. The pair, especially Glenn, were said to be jealous and angry over how much Kim made. They wanted a slice of the action without him being in the equation. After attacking Kim, they placed his body in a truck and drove him out to the desert. Investigators wasted little time placing Godwin and Soto under arrest for the crime. Months after Kim's body had been discovered, Glenn Stewart Godwin was sent to a vocational institute in California. Godwin spent the first few months of his sentence scoping out prison life before deciding it was not for him. He made a few friends in prison, and they all agreed they needed to get out. The group dreamt up several plans until 1987, when they were ready to put their plans into action. Fortunately, the prison staff were one step ahead of Godwin and his crew, and the escape attempt was thwarted. Most prisoners might find themselves in solitary confinement for their escape attempts, but Godwin's fate was to be far worse. Weeks after trying to escape, guards gave him the news that he was to be transferred to Folsom Prison in Folsom, California. Folsom had a heavy reputation then, and the name itself still conjures fear. The moment Godwin stepped through the doors of Folsom Prison, he knew he needed to escape. While inside Folsom, Godwin began communicating with his old cellmate, Lorenz Karlik. While in prison, Godwin had also married, and he tasked his new wife and ex-roommate with cooking up a new escape plan. Godwin's wife and Karlik spent months putting together the perfect plan, and by June of that year it was ready to enact. In the middle of the night, Godwin was able to slip away from the guards. Once free from his cell, Godwin made his way to the outside of the prison and down a storm drain that had been spray-painted white. His wife and ex-roommate had spray-painted a path for him along the tunnel, which ensured his road to freedom. Every part of the plan had been carefully thought out, and when he reached the end of the tunnel, he found an old raft, weapons, and a light. Godwin didn't quite know it yet, but he had ended up in the American River. Godwin paddled to the water's edge, landing safely at the riverbank. A short distance away, his wife Shelley was waiting for him in a car. According to CBS, Godwin was fluent in Spanish, so they decided to drive to the US border with Mexico where they would cross. Godwin could not leave a life of crime behind him and began selling narcotics soon after. This provided him with the money necessary to survive under the radar, or at least that's what he believed. By the early 90s, Godwin found himself on the radar not just of American authorities, but Mexican authorities too. In early 1991, Godwin was arrested by Mexican authorities and sent to Puente Grande prison. A few months into his sentence, he caught wind that Mexican authorities were planning on extraditing him to the US, and decided he needed to flee once more. But this time he had a new approach. According to CBS, Godwin allegedly took the life of a fellow prisoner, knowing it would complicate matters in his extradition process, as Mexican authorities would first want to take him to trial for his offense. While the Mexican and US authorities ironed out the details, Godwin took the chance and escaped again in September of '91. Ever since then, he's been on the run. In 1996, Glenn Stewart Godwin was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. Shelley Godwin was captured in the US in late 1990 for aiding and abetting her husband. The FBI believes Godwin may have undergone plastic surgery to both change his looks and maintain his youthful appearance. Those who know Godwin commented on his love of champagne, nightlife, and ladies. It's also believed that Godwin is hiding in Latin America, using his criminal knowledge to stay under the radar, and may likely be selling narcotics. There's a $20,000 reward for information that leads to his arrest, and anybody with information is asked to contact the FBI's Sacramento office at 916-746-7000. Number 2. For 46-year-old Jabali Dumas, August 15th of 2019 was shaping up like any other day. The family man resided in California, living a quiet, unassuming life. Thursday, August 15th, was to be as unremarkable as the rest. That was until one man crossed his path and changed his life forever. The day would end with Jabali lying unresponsive in a hospital bed, and seeing 27-year-old Omar Cardenas becoming the 528th person to be added to the FBI's most wanted list. 46-year-old Jabali Dumas was described as a kind and loving man who cared deeply for his family. On August 15, 2019, Jabali visited the Hair Icon barbershop in a strip mall in California. Jabali had planned on getting his hair cut before running a few errands and returning home to his family, but one man had other plans. After stepping out of the barbershop, Jabali came face to face with 27-year-old Omar Cardenas. Before Jabali could speak, Omar reached into his pocket and pulled out a weapon. According to the FBI, Omar then discharged 9 rounds at Jabali, 6 of which struck him, 1 being in the head. Passers-by immediately ducked and panicked, and screams ran out. People rushed to Jabali's aid as the police and an ambulance were called. Shoppers quickly realized Jabali had sustained a significant head injury and was unlikely to survive. While chaos ensued outside the barbershop, Omar put his weapon away, ran to his car, and drove away from the scene, never to be seen again. Minutes later, they arrived and tried to save Jabali's life, but it was too late. His family were informed of the tragic news, and he was transported to the nearest hospital. While EMTs tended to Jabali and others who may have been harmed in the attack, the police immediately began their investigation. There were plenty of witnesses as the crime took place at a busy strip mall and outside of a popular barbershop, all of whom said Omar was around 30 feet from Jabali before he drew his weapon in an unprovoked attack. Thankfully, a handful of witnesses were able to give a description of Omar and his vehicle, which quickly led to the police identifying him. As the crime took place in a busy area, investigators were able to pull CCTV footage of Omar. At 16:03, Omar is seen walking into the car park where he would attack Jabali seconds later. At 16:04, Omar is seen running away from the scene and in the direction of his car. The Los Angeles Police Department was informed of a possible fugitive and began scanning the streets for him. Jabali's passing soon made the news, and all eyes were on Omar and the Los Angeles PD. Residents lived in fear, not knowing where the lone madman would strike next. The investigation intensified, but the LAPD struggled to capture Omar. As the investigation progressed, the LAPD learned of Omar's troubling past. According to the FBI, Omar is alleged to be part of the Pierce street gang. This new information added an extra layer of fear and uncertainty to the case. The connection between Omar and Jabali remained unknown, and the LAPD feared he would strike at a random citizen again. After attacking Jabali, it's believed Omar fled to Mexico to escape the reach of US law enforcement. Almost a year after the attack, on April 3, 2020, the Superior Court of Los Angeles filed a warrant for his arrest. The public was alerted to be on the lookout, and a reward for information was posted. Despite the best investigative efforts of the Los Angeles Police Department, Omar Cardenas was nowhere to be found. Being a real threat to the public, the Los Angeles police called in the help of the FBI. The FBI took over the case and discovered more possible clues and links to Omar. In more recent press releases, the FBI states Omar may be hiding with family in Southern California. July 20th of 2022 became a historic day in FBI history for 2 reasons. Firstly, 27-year-old Omar Cardenas became the 528th person to be added to the FBI's most wanted list. Secondly, his addition to the list came after Eugene Palmer, who was wanted for taking the life of his daughter-in-law, was removed from the list. Eugene Palmer has successfully evaded the FBI for over 11 years. There's currently a $250,000 reward for information that leads to Omar's arrest, and he's to be considered armed and extremely dangerous. Anyone with information is asked to contact the FBI's Los Angeles office at 310-477-6565. Number 1. In 2009, the First National Bank of Omaha began receiving troubling calls from its customers who claimed to have had money stolen from their accounts. When the First National Bank looked into the issue, they saw the bank transfers had come from the customers' accounts and nowhere else. The number of reports quickly skyrocketed, and the First National Bank decided to call for the help of the FBI. Within a matter of weeks, the FBI uncovered a criminal syndicate so large that it was almost incomprehensible, and one man stood at the top of it all. FBI officers were sent to the First National Bank of Omaha to investigate, but the further they looked, the less sense everything made. The transactions occurred from the victims' IP addresses, and accounts using their details and passwords. Had it not been for the sheer magnitude of reports, the FBI may have brushed this off as an elaborate scam. One officer in particular, James Craig, who had transferred from the FBI's IT department months earlier, immediately felt something was wrong. Drawing upon his experience in IT, Craig examined the victims' computers and found a horrifying common denominator. They had all been infected with the Zeus Trojan horse. A Trojan horse is a piece of malware that masquerades as a legitimate piece of software. Often, these viruses are picked up when downloading programs or other files from the internet. Officer Craig discovered the Trojan horse had been created by someone going by the name Zeus online. In online circles, he had also gone by the name Slavic or Lucky12345. When interviewed, most victims recalled receiving an email with a link attached to it. Some of these emails were from shipping companies, asking them to download a file and verify their shipping address. While on the surface these links often led nowhere, deep down the link was tracking its victim's every move. Once the Trojan gained access to the computer, it was able to pull personal data and information. According to Wired, the Zeus virus was even equipped with a keylogger, which could record usernames and passwords. Once the virus had its victims' details, all he needed them to do was log into their online banking, and the virus would do all of the work. From the bank's perspective, this is how they only saw transactions taking place on the victim's account, or to their IP address. The money would be sent to different places worldwide, where it would end up in the hands of criminals. As the FBI began digging further into Zeus, they discovered that it was being sold as a tool in various hacker forums. Now, anyone with a small amount of money could purchase the Zeus virus and infect unwilling victims. It was around this time that the FBI discovered the Zeus virus had another tool attached to it, Jabber. Jabber is an instant online messaging tool that came with the virus. Those who sent out the virus could use Jabber to alert them when a victim was online, making it easier to keylog their details. It also allowed groups to communicate privately to dish out coordinated attacks. Ransomware as a service was just taking off in the online world, and the Zeus Trojan horse posed a severe threat to many. As more hackers learned of its existence, the Zeus virus was being used for more prominent exploits. Soon, it wasn't just state banks being targeted, but CEOs, CFO, and members of large multinational corporations. These attacks continued worldwide, and criminal groups in the US were using unsuspecting victims to launder money. In one scheme, young students were asked to open accounts, then withdraw the money days later, keeping a small percent for themselves. Eventually, the FBI were able to trace part of the operation to the criminal hacking gang in Ukraine. They had stolen thousands of dollars worldwide, but they still didn't give up the tool's creator, Zeus. In 2010, the FBI, along with law enforcement agencies, arrested 39 people worldwide, but much to their dismay, none of them were Slavic. Other hacking groups had been dismantled, but Slavic remained anonymous. At this point, it became clear to Officer Craig that Slavic was a professional with extensive knowledge of IT. Officer Craig continued to chase Slavic down for the next year, but to no avail. Slavic had gone quiet, and many in the FBI believed they would never find him. Slavic had undoubtedly made millions and may have even retired after noticing the stir that he had caused. Then, in 2011, Officer Craig caught wind of another virus operating eerily similar to that of Jabber Zeus. This time, the virus was being called Game Over Zeus, and it utilized even more robust tools. The old version of Zeus had included what's known as a botnet, short for bot network. These networks take control of hundreds, even thousands of PCs worldwide and use them for a common purpose. The owner, the bot herder, or the bot master will often use these computers to pump out mass volumes of spam or commit DDoS attacks. With a botnet, those who purchased the virus could now bring more PCs into the fold. With one PC infected and their details harvested, that PC could send out spam emails to bring in even more targets. Officer Craig knew just how dangerous botnets could be if they were to fall into the wrong hands. Many criminal organizations use botnets to send online spam, which is known to cost countries millions of dollars each year. Craig used his background in IT to dig further into the botnets, and as he learned more, he knew it would be almost impossible to dismantle. Game Over Zeus used two types of command servers, which made it almost impossible to take down. According to Wired, if one infected device sensed that its connection with the command server had been interrupted, it would rely on a peer-to-peer network to find a new command server. This meant the botnet would never be entirely offline, and the botmaster would always have a safe place to operate from. The FBI knew that it wouldn't be able to fight such a sophisticated botnet alone, so it called in the help from some of the biggest IT companies around the world. During their search, they received a vital tip that would lead to the identification of the elusive Slavic. The tipster told Fox IT to look deeper into the business club, the group Slavic was the leader of. While digging into servers, they found an email address linked to the Slavic account. After much back and forth, they finally came upon a name: Yevgeny Bogachev. Slavic was well known in online circles as a mastermind coder, hacker, and criminal extraordinaire. And there was plenty of evidence against the 30-year-old, but there was one problem. Bogachev is a Russian citizen, and due to global tensions at the time, the US were not able to agree on extradition terms with Russia. That didn't stop the FBI from placing Bogachev on the 10 Cyber's Most Wanted list. There's a $3 million reward for information that leads to his arrest, the highest reward ever offered for a cyber criminal. Anyone with information is asked to contact FBI's Omaha office at 402-493-8688. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.